You know those mindlessly long therapeutic activities that actually can... Ginger. What do you want? Ginger. No, get out. Get out of here. Bye. Anyway, you know those mindlessly long therapeutic activities that actually contribute to something in the long run and makes changes that you can only slowly see? Yeah, this whole episode is basically that. So let me give you just a quick visual reminder as to how this thing looked when we left it last in episode 2. Yeah, pretty rough. But on the 12th of March, I had set aside some time after work to simply clean off the surface of the engine, but without removing too many parts, to avoid any of this shit from getting in places where it shouldn't be. Not that it should be here to begin with, but you get the idea. So I just sat down, threw on a basic mask, and started scrubbing with a few wire brushes, some brake cleaner, tar remover, and eventually I started using the vacuum as well. The system was basically to spray the cleaner on the dirt to get it easier to scratch off, then use the wire brushes to lift the dirt off the surface, and then use the vacuum to suck up the heavier chunks that come off, and then basically just repeat the process with a ton of elbow grease on the side. It wasn't long before the filth had begun to meet its maker. Me, the guy with the polka socks. I've never seen a more disgusting bike before in my life. I mean, some places were so dirty with the filth that it was basically caked on in such a way that made it seem like it was painted intentionally matte black. Again, I'm being cautious as to not take off too many things and have crap fall into the block, so I left the airbox and a few other things stay there for now because I wasn't ready to remove them just yet. The sun was also beginning to set, so I had moved on to the final drive axle and the swing arm, which are two things that I could just take off and take inside and work on. The axle of these bikes has their own dedicated oil supply, which the manual recommends that you ride the bike first before you change it so you can heat it up, kind of like the engine. Same with the transmission, it has its own dedicated supply. For the record, that axle is heavier than it looks. It's even heavier than the swing arm, which honestly weighs nothing in comparison. So first I took the swing arm and I gave it a good clean and sand just to get it to a vaguely paintable state. I used 180 grit, 400 grit, and 600 grit sandpaper, only because even though I could get it to shine like brand new if I had gone up to, like 3,000 grit, it would be pointless because to paint these parts, you just have to sand it again with 400 or 600 grit so the paint could grip it anyway, so why waste it? What mattered to me at the moment was that the parts get clean with maybe a little bit of shine, but ultimately mainly a semi-paintable texture just to start. The swing arm cleaned up pretty damn nice and showed me the potential of getting all this metal into decent looking shape. I examined the final drive axle and determined that it would need a lot of brake cleaner to clean it up, which obviously you don't want to use too much of that indoors. So I just went ahead and waited until the next day where I would have some sun to spray down outside. The axle proved to be quite annoying to clean because A, it's just so freaking heavy to maneuver around, and B, the brake disc bolts had gotten stripped out while I tried to remove them, so it would just spin there when I tried to hold it up. The splines on the final drive were kind of gross and covered in gunk and probably some rust, but it cleaned up very nice and the condition of the teeth themselves were actually very good. I went through the last of my brake cleaner trying to get this thing looking nice, and don't forget this moment because fuck the bike, dude. Brake cleaner is the real focus of this episode.
This bitch is empty. Yeet!
The entire swing arm unit, when bolted together, was looking fantastic. But in comparison, that engine, tranny, and bell housing combo out there in the yard was still on life support. So with my patriotic socks on, I went outside and did a little bit more disassembling of the components still on the block. Basically the fuel injectors and the airbox / throttle body assembly. I was ready to start doing more cleaning, so I stuffed the intake ports with some clean rags, and I went to Advanced Auto and Home Depot to score cleaning products, as well as a proper respirator and goggle combo, because this brake cleaner is some really harsh stuff, and despite being a millennial, I actually somewhat enjoy living. First, I gave the whole transmission area a little preliminary spray of brake cleaner. Then I removed the battery tray, the spark plug coils, that humongous alternator, the starter motor, all of which were extremely easy to remove, by the way. But what was revealed was a surface that was just as disgusting as the block. Man, I'm convinced that this bike had not been fully apart for a decade, because no one would dare put this back together with the amount of shit caked on there. Or would they? Maybe I'm just speaking for myself. Then it was time to get scrubbing with the same tried and true method that I use on the top of the block. You know, just patiently rinse and repeat. In fact, after a while, you could kind of see the actual seam between the bell and the transmission because the tranny is getting noticeably lighter. And now for that inner part where the swing arm fits. Again, I used the same method, but I actually ran out of brake cleaner while I was working on that section, because of course I did. Obviously, I wasn't too thrilled to have to make another run to Advanced Auto, but you know what? Fuck it. It was like 10 a.m., so I could go get some grub too, considering I hadn't eaten for the day. You know, I hit up everybody's favorite cesspool for one of those godlike McGriddles. And then I went on to Advanced Auto for that brake cleaner, and then I got distracted by the pretty colors of the paint cabinet. And plus, it was unlocked for some reason. As I mentioned in that last moto vlog, I'm thinking of a blue color scheme for the engine. But then I got carried away and actually got some primer and clear coat, and 4 cans of brake cleaner because I refused to come back here again for anything. And that attempt was very much in vain. And I also happened to just pick up some magnetic metal trays and some metal polish. You know, when the build is done, I had planned to do a money tally of, you know, how much of all the parts applied to the bike cost as a sort of budget expectation for people who plan to do something like this. You know, I was just gonna count the actual parts and not the tools / consumables like this. But after seeing how much even this shit adds up to, yeah, I'm including it at the end too. Okay, back to the good stuff. The top, the sides, and the inside of the transmission were sufficiently clean, but I saved the bottom for when I take the center stand off. In order to access all the bolts that connect the tranny to the bell, you have to remove the kickstand center stand assembly, which is actually all one unit held on by 4 bolts. So I jacked it all the way up, and I didn't really like how unstable it looked when the table was at its highest setting. So I took one of my scissor jacks and I just propped the back end up with a plank for perfect stability. Shout out to those planks. The bolts were in there pretty tight, so I had to do some karate to get them to break loose. And thumbs up for the dot socks. So with the bottom of the tranny exposed, I was able to give it a nice clean as well. So these are the 6 bolts that hold the good stuff together. I was prepared for it to be heavy, so I got some cardboard ready so it wouldn't scrape on the concrete if I had to put it down fast. Pow. And if you're wondering, and you shouldn't be wondering because I already told you all this, there's no oil between the engine and the transmission because they're both sealed from each other and they have their own oil like a car. The clutch is also dry like a car. At this point, I'm just like, where'd the rest of this bike go? Like, there's nothing here anymore. And this engine block looks like it belongs in a car, not on a motorcycle. Anyway, there's the clutch, and the cover plate is kind of rusty, which makes sense because I did notice a little bit of gunk in there. So I cleaned out the bell and I removed the clutch assembly. The plan was to actually remove the entire bell. So I also took off the crankshaft cover, but I later decided that it wouldn't be worth it because I need a crankshaft locker tool anyway. But hey, you can see what the crank looks like, which is pretty cool. So I cleaned out the clutch housing and pretty much got it spotless, and then I inspected the clutch plates themselves. It doesn't seem too urgent to replace them in my opinion, considering it didn't slip at all during the period of time while I was riding the bike. But I would like to hear your opinion too. Take a look at it. What do you think? I see some glazing and wear on the friction plate. But for now, I just lubed up the contact points of the clutch and just threw it back in there. The next step was to, where did the engine go? Nah, I just brought it inside because I was done working on it for the day. The next day had some forecasted rain and the engine was a little bit too naked to leave outside in this state. So I just put the cover on the frame and I took everything else inside and just called it a day. I wanted to wait a few days before I jumped into rebuilding the cylinder head because I wanted to make sure that I had everything at least ordered before I do such a serious job. So I ordered a valve spring compressor, a gasket scraper, assembly lube, and the head gasket itself. On the third day of work, I was ready to do the engine teardown after work inside of my basement.
So I undid the bolts on the valve cover and readied my eyes for the filth that would more than likely be sitting inside of this thing. I opened it up, and it was beautiful.
Wait, what? Yeah, dude, they're absolutely pristine in there. Everything about it, cam gears, cam lobes, timing chain, bearing caps, everything looked fantastic, and even the oil was dripping gold with beauty. I was so confused that I flew to Instagram for opinions on whether or not I should even touch this thing. Most people agreed that there's no point in fixing what ain't broken, and that I should just check the valves, which I was already planning on doing. So I dug up the feeler gauges, which I hadn't used since I did the valves on my Honda Rebel back in 2015. Okay, so the valve clearance job, right? It's not hard to check the valves, but it is tricky to adjust them on this bike. So the whole time I was hoping like hell that things would be reasonably inspect because that would mean that my good luck would just keep rolling in. To properly inspect the valve clearances, the engine must be cold, which is great because this bitch ain't run for a few weeks. The top camshaft is the intake cam and the bottom one is the exhaust cam. They both have different clearance values with a range of 0.15 millimeters and 0.20 millimeters for the intake side, which in American speak is what, like 6 thousandths of an inch to 8 thousandths. I may have forgotten how to count place value, but y'all will let me know if I got that right. America. The exhaust side is 0.25 to 0.30 millis, which translates to 0.010 to 0.012, whatever. So for the intake, I found the 3 gauges that are 0.006, 0.007, and 0.008 inches wide. And for the exhaust, I use 0.010, 0.011, and 0.012 inches wide. So you just make sure that the valve in question is all the way closed and the round part of the cam lobe is actually facing the valve. So the pointed area is facing you directly. This will always mean that you can check one intake valve and one exhaust valve at a time before you have to turn the engine via the crank. So for the rear cylinder intake valve, I was only able to slide the 0.006 gauge in between the cam lobe and the valve bucket, which means that the clearance is somewhere between 0.006 and 0.007, which is in spec. The exhaust valve was ready to be checked, but only fit the 0.010 gauge, which means that the clearance is somewhere between 0.010 and 0.011. Rinse, repeat, and I was done. And you can see that the second intake valve on top was actually able to fit all 3 gauges of the range. So that one was very slightly out of spec. very slightly, because as a test, I tried to get the .009 gauge in, but I couldn't do it, which means the clearance is somewhere between .008 and .009. I know that one slightly loose valve on the intake side is not worth shimming, and none of them were too tight, which would be the real issue. Basically, the engine checked out, and I lucked out again. Time to button this thing back up and get ready to take it outside. But another day, not today. So fast forward to day 4. Even though the crankcase was somewhat clean, the head and the intake ports were still filthy. The engine was still indoors, so I couldn't just douse it in brake cleaner like I would have loved to. But I could clean off the little rubber intake thingies with the little clamps that go around them. I had ordered some new fuel injectors, but I wanted to clean these up to at least just put back in the injector ports for now, so debris doesn't fall in. So I gave them a quick wipe and then focused on the intake stubs with a small amount of brake cleaner, an amount that wouldn't kill me. But look, turns out this stuff will turn a Solo cup into a soup can. So yeah, use your gloves and wash your hands often if you're using the stuff. Reminds me of that Breaking Bad scene with the bathtub acid. Anyway, I got everything all cleaned up and laid out. Plastic and rubber tends to be what dies on old vehicles that haven't been cared for well. But these actually all look pretty good after a nice bath, which is excellent because that means that I can reuse them. The clamps are really nice and even have the BMW logo engraved on them, which is a nice touch. The next real day of work was a few days later when I had the day off and I was able to bring the engine back outside to clean off the underside. The oil pan has black paint all around it, even the oil pump as well, but the bottom of the cylinder head that you can actually see there is just so dirty that it looks painted. So I gave it all a good scrub down, and this is what the block looks like after this whole cleaning fiasco. In order to seal up the intake ports, I also quickly cleaned up the throttle body assembly and the airbox with some brake cleaner that I had left, because that was looking kind of rough with all that grime and I wasn't going to throw it back on there looking that dirty. So then I stuck that back on the block along with the rest of the running gear and the wheel, which I also gave a quick rinse. The throttle bodies look good sitting on top of it, but the oil pan has annoying black paint on it, which makes it look dirty, but no, it's just paint, I swear, it's clean. The oil pump on the front also had that black paint to the same effect. But all things considered, the running gear was now clean, and I could safely say that phase 1 is complete. Unfortunately, I can guarantee that the build will slow down a little from here because this begins the portion where I must buy all of the expensive modifications in a specific sequence in order to make the build go smoothly and flow right. Let me explain so I don't leave you with any questions. So what I just completed is the preliminary cleaning, which not only makes the brick easier and less filthy to work on, but it also allows me to prep it for the paint job later on easier. The reason why I haven't painted it yet is because A, even though it's a part right now, you don't want to paint something that you'll be throwing tools and parts at because you'll just fuck up the finish. And B, the weather hasn't fully warmed up yet, which would help with the paint drying, so I might as well wait for that too. What I plan to do now is just leave it as is and buy all of the modifications necessary to take it to a fabrication shop that I have some experience with so they can hack up the rear frame and to make it fit that cafe look, because right now it doesn't really do that, which I'll talk about in the next episode. Right now I need to do the front end swap to a GSX-R 750 model front end in order to mock up the correct stance for the bike. I already have the front end on its way to my house, so that's more or less done. It's already in the mail. However, I will also have to buy a custom triple tree that would allow the Gixxer front end to bolt directly on the K-bike frame, which ain't cheap. Because see, if you try to use the actual, if you use a custom stem, sure it'll fit. But if you use the actual Gixxer triple tree, the force will just slap the tank, and nobody wants that. You could make frame stops, but then your turning radius becomes that of a fucking semi truck. So what you need to do is you need to get further offset triple trees. I also need to find a wheel too, but that would pretty much sort out the front end for me. So then I'll move on to the rear. In fact, I already sort of started a month ago on the rear when I bought a custom horizontal shock linkage that was designed by a garage in Brazil. It's a real hefty chunk of machined aluminum, and holy shit is this thing heavy and nice. I bought this thing before I even had the place to put the bike, so basically I had this thing during episode 1, but I didn't mention it because why would I mention it? There's no point. I got it so early because I just wanted to lock it down because when I was buying it, they had a short supply, so I was like, you know what? I'm gonna get this now, get it out of the way. It wasn't cheap, but whatever. I'll have to get the frame chopped up to mount this thing, and I also need to buy a new modern shock. In order to know how I want to shape the seat area of the frame, the back, with a seat tray, all that type of stuff, I'll also need to buy the seat first and then shape the frame to it specifically. So in the coming weeks, I'll be picking up all the remaining things from the shopping list and since I'm not rich, it's gonna take a sec. But I'll go into great detail about each part when it's actually all in my hands, so don't worry about that. But all the big cleaning is done, and this is the brake cleaner death toll. You know, I was wearing a respirator and all of that stuff, but this stuff is still pretty gnarly, so if my future kids come out all fucked up, then we know why. I didn't mention it before, but there was actually a point where the advanced auto clerk was just like, dude, just buy our brand, because for the day, it was actually buy one, get one free. But their formula, it isn't as strong, and the jet isn't as powerful. Let's see how big this pile grows by the end of it. I didn't even throw these cans out because I just want to see it quantified at the end of this all. I'll probably start selling off parts, you know, to build up some money to buy the new parts, because I'm actually sitting on I basically parted the bike out. I have all these parts that need to be sold. So that's all I got for this one. And considering I won't be able to do much work on the bike this week or probably even next week, I'm going to return to the informational videos on topics other than the K-bike, so if you've been waiting on those to come back, then you can expect some of those to drop soon. I'll be doing periodic updates on the parts via IG, so if you want to keep an eye out for that, just give me a follow over there. Just watch episode 3 of the K100 build series, and I'll see you on the next one.